Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I cap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 3rd of June, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So we've got a fresh post from Justin Drake here today talking about a fungible and governance-free liquid staking or LSD, a liquid staking derivative or LSD friendly to solo validators. Now you guys know there's been a lot of discussion around liquid staking lately, especially around Lido and their dominance within the network. Well, Justin Drake and a bunch of other people who have helped Justin with this have put out this blog post, and those people who helped him include some people like Vitalik, of course, Danny Ryan, Tim Byko, and I don't know what this handle is here. Francesco, I think, is another Ethereum researcher. So basically, the TLDR is that they've proposed a fungible and governance-free LSD compatible with solo validating. The LSD is secured via hardware-based slashing protection and enjoys a higher capital efficiency than Lido's STETH. So essentially, as I said, an alternative to Lido's derivative token STETH. This one's called SETH, and it's more capital efficient because I guess like Justin argues here that with STETH you're paying you have 10% capital inefficiency because you're paying delegation fees, and which is 5% operator fees and 5% Lido fees there. So whereas with this design it would be roughly 3% inefficiency, which is obviously vastly better than what Lido's is here. I think this is quite interesting. It's not a silver bullet or anything like that, guys. Like, there is not going to be a silver bullet for any of these kind of like issues. We're just going to keep iterating and getting towards kind of like something that is beneficial to both the network and to users. So this would be obviously very beneficial to the network because it is geared towards solo stakers. So if you're already a solo staker, I guess like when withdrawals are enabled, you could withdraw and then restake using kind of like this design. If it goes live, or if you're going to add another validator, then you could use this design here. So basically, as it says here, this is a hardware-based slashing protection. So it uses Intel's SGX platform, which is a trusted hardware kind of like platform here. I think that's the only one that Justin considers to be, I guess, secure enough to do something like this. And it's got a bunch of different mechanisms built into it to make sure that the solo staking process is still respected here. So I highly recommend giving this a read to see what it's all about here, and kind of like giving a read to some of the replies as well. There's just one reply here from Oysen, I think his name is here. Maybe I'm saying his name wrong. You should give that a read as well. I do want to just quickly mention that this is what I was talking about, I guess, yesterday, and I probably like the last couple of weeks, about more competition. The competition doesn't have to come from for-profit entities because, for example, this design wouldn't actually have a governance token associated with it. So it wouldn't have like what Lido has with LDO, for example, or what Rockable has with RPL, or whatever other project has a token attached to it. It would just simply be public good, so to speak, right? So there's going to be that. There's going to be the enterprise solutions like centralized exchange staking, like what Coinbase is doing with their liquid staking. There's going to be for-profit kind of like individual companies and entities like Lido and Stakewise and kind of like other entities out there on the more kind of like the centralized spectrum, like Rocket Pool, right? And obviously I've mentioned Swell Network as well before, but the more competition, the better, right? So in my mind, there's like just a couple of key ways to, I guess, like make sure no one staking pool look at LSD is dominant. One of them is competition. The second one is kind of like social signaling. So basically, there's been talk recently about kind of like asking these providers to self-cap at a certain percentage of the network. I have various thoughts on that, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this, and I've been getting pushback on them. My thoughts basically boil down to, I think the social layer should only be invoked in an aggressive way when something is like an existential threat to Ethereum. I don't think we're there yet with Lido, for example. Other people do. That's, I think, where the difference kind of lies. But you guys know my opinion on that, and I'm not going to rehash it there. It's more about kind of like waiting for withdrawals, getting more competition on board, and not being too hastily about it. But I do respect I guess, like the effectiveness of social signaling. I'm definitely big on the social layer. Ethereum has a great one, but I just sometimes wonder, are we poking the bear too much sometimes? Like before the bear has even done anything wrong, right? Or before we even know it's a bear, maybe it's a puppy, right? Maybe it's going to be nice. But even then, we shouldn't be relying on altruism or relying on kind of like the word of a provider or anyone really. I mean, we're in this to be trustless. We're in this to make sure that we can build systems that don't rely on less on on human kind of like coordination and human trust than the other systems that we've had previously. So those would be like the two major things there. The more competition and the kind of like the social signaling. But on top of that as well, I think just more education and awareness around this. I think with the client diversity thing, one of the major reasons why we kind of like had a supermajority with Prism was because a lot of people didn't even understand why that's a bad thing. They didn't understand why any one client having more than 66% of the network is kind of like, critical and potentially existential, an existential risk to the network. Then we had like a months-long campaign of educating, use individuals, kind of like institutions, such as kind of Coinbase and Kraken, obviously, that were high up there in the Prism usage, and they came down once they understood the risks. So I think education plays a huge part here, and that's why I'm always talking about this sort of stuff. But yeah, those would be the three main things that I can think of off the top of my head that would go into kind of like making sure that no one pool is dominant. Because we could say, oh, okay, we made it so that Lido isn't as dominant. They agreed to cap themselves, and their dominance came down. But what if a more kind of like malicious entity comes along, for example, right? Or what if someone who, or kind of a provider comes along and basically says, well, we're just going to create an LSD, we're going to juice the hell out of the rewards, and we're going to get as much ETH sucked up into us as possible, and then we're going to start censoring transactions and things like that. So there's always that risk too. But the social signaling works to beat that back as well, and the education by basically saying, people, hey, like, this kind of like the provider has too much share of the network, stake with someone else sort of thing, just like we did with client diversity. But the key difference between client diversity and kind of like staking centralization right now is the fact that you can't change who you kind of like stake with, or at least if you sell your ST ETH, you're not withdrawing that ETH out of Lido. You're just selling it and it goes to someone else, right? Whereas with client diversity, you could change your client from Prism to Lighthouse, for example, and it would materially affect the outcome. So we're going to have to wait. I think we're just going to have to wait till withdrawals to see kind of like the material impacts, but it doesn't mean we have to wait on the social signaling side. It doesn't mean we have to wait on the education side and the encouraging more competition side. We definitely can continue to do that without waiting for withdrawals, which are probably still at least 12 months away, if not more. I would probably say it could even be 18 months away, right? We're going to have to see, but like at least 12 months away from now. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that on that front there. As I said, I think I have my own views on this, and maybe I don't articulate them as well as I could on the refuel. As you guys know, I just kind of like do these off the cuff. I do it from a stream of consciousness here. If you want to talk about this, definitely talk about it with me in the Discord channel and give me your opinions. If you disagree or agree with me on the whole liquid staking thing, I would love to hear them, because I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just giving my view and my opinions on things, and maybe I'm wrong. And the thing is that I understand when people get fired up and passionate about this, because the cost of being wrong is so high. We obviously don't want to turn the beacon chain into something that's just run by cartels. So we definitely want to set that bar, now, and make sure that nothing turns into a cartel. But at the end of the day, I do feel like that different opinions need to be heard. I don't want kind of like everyone to just be agreeing on one thing and then it turns out that thing was wrong, right? Because there's that risk as well. So yeah. Anyway, leaving it at that. Moving on for now. Sam here from Blockworks put out an interesting tweet yesterday. He said, yesterday marked the highest amount of gas ever used on Ethereum mainnet to settle layer 2 transactions. 3.95 billion of the 100 billion daily gas limit was used to settle L2 transactions, or in other words, 3.95%. And you can see on the kind of graph here that it was the largest day into that massive spike there. Obviously, this was due to Optimism's token launch. A lot of people kind of like got onboarded to OP to claim their tokens and used the Optimism network in order to maybe trade in and out of those tokens, claim all that good stuff there. And as a result, Optimism paid record fees to Ethereum Layer 1 for that. Now, I've heard this really stupid narrative being circulating for a while, and I've mentioned it on the refuel before, but I think it's just worth mentioning again now. When people say that layer 2s are parasitic to Ethereum, it's so dumb, because we all know that layer 2s have to pay Ethereum in kind of like ETH for their security, and you see hard evidence of this right here in this chart. Like, this is literally on-chain verifiable evidence that the layer 2s are paying layer 1 and are making a material impact, right, when activity is high. And eventually, obviously, we expect this kind of like to keep going up, the amount of gas that they're using. And you can see it has trended up somewhat, right? But we eventually expect it to be 20, 30, 40, 50, eventually 100%, like maybe down the line of Ethereum's kind of like layer 1 block space. being used by layer 2s when we get that kind of like activity on there. And that will always pay ETH to the network, and most of that ETH will be burned as part of 1559. But not only that, that's kind of like the direct value add to ETH and Ethereum, but there's more than that. There's obviously a lot of the things around alignment, right? Around these teams doing social signaling and basically saying, hey, like we're super aligned with Ethereum. We want to use Ethereum. We want to kind of like just scale Ethereum, and we're not going to kind of like deploy our solutions to other networks or try and kind of like have our, for example, Optimism on another kind of like layer 1. We're just going to have it on Ethereum. That's not to say that someone can't fork that and put it on another layer 1. That's not to say that some of these layer 2 networks won't also deploy to other layer 1s. Maybe they will, right? Like I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to tell what the future's going to look like. But I think Ethereum layer 1 in its current state is the best place for L2s to settle. And in the future, it's going to be in an even better place with things like proto-dank sharding and dank sharding in general implemented, because it means it will be a super cheap place for these L2s to settle on while still being super decentralized and secure. So there's all of that as well that goes into it. So anyone who's telling you that layer 2s are parasitic to Ethereum has absolutely no idea what they're talking about and should really not be listened to unless they retract that statement. Because in general, if people are saying that when the evidence is so starkly against that point, then I don't think it should be taken seriously. I know I just mentioned that we should hear differing opinions, but there's opinions and then there's things that are just based on hard facts. I don't think the opinion of saying kind of like layer 2s are parasitic to Ethereum is really grounded in any sort of reality or truth, because we can see the reality and truth before our eyes. And I don't think they're parasitic. I think they're very, very kind of like good for Ethereum. They have like a symbiotic relationship with it. And, you know, to kind of like play devil's advocate here, maybe they do become parasitic, some of them, where they get a lot of activity and then they just say, oh, well, screw you, Ethereum, we're going to become our own layer 1. I think that's silly for a bunch of different reasons, but like the major two reasons are, one, in order to become a layer 1, they would have to bootstrap their own validator set, and to do that, they have to have a token, and then they have to issue that token in order to, they have to kind of like do new issuance for that token in order to pay validators. And two, on top of that, it also just makes zero sense from an ecosystem point of view and from an alignment point of view. So I think that that's just not likely to happen for most of the L2s. Some are going to attempt it, like that's for sure. But I just think it's not likely to happen for most of them. So I just wanted to kind of like point that out to you guys. All right, so Litcoen here had a great tweet today where he said, can people please stop posting screenshots of governance forums and present them as already made policy decisions? Anyone can post anything into any governance forum, so unless there's not at least a snapshot vote to support it, it's just noise. And I think I mentioned this yesterday when talking about the Optimism forum post, the one around kind of like not rewarding future airdrop users if they sold their, the first airdrop, and then a bunch of other ones out there. This is good to keep in mind, guys. Like, anyone can create an account on this forum. Anyone can post anything they want. It does not mean anything, really. It's the same as someone just going on Twitter and saying something. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that it's gonna happen. It doesn't mean that it's even gonna get voted on or that people even care about it. It's just some random person going on a forum and kind of posting that. Now, obviously, depending on who it is, if it's a random person or if it's someone that's well known, you take it more seriously. If it's someone that's well known, like Hasu, and I'm going to talk about what Hasu has said in a moment, you take it more seriously than just some random unknown person. And what I've noticed is a lot of these governance forums get overrun by yes men who basically just say, I agree to this. Yes, this is cool. I very much agree. And like, how do you know they're just not the same person? Just basically having a bunch of accounts and agreeing with themselves. You don't. And this again goes back to why we need things like proof of personhood, decentralized identity, anti-Sybil resistant mechanisms, because it's just so easy and the cost is so low to pretend to be someone else on the internet or pretend to be multiple people on the internet, right? So I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind when we're looking at forum posts, especially. Now, I spoke about Hasu, and basically Hasu will go into this discussion here, basically arguing why the OP token shouldn't be a fee token on Optimism. And his main point was, the OP token profit is a function of sequencer revenues. Now, for those of you who don't know, the sequencer is basically the piece of software that runs the transactions on a layer 2. And then Hasu continues by saying, which is itself a function of providing the best possible user experience to devs and users. Having users pay fees in a minor token will hurt demand more than reservation demand will increase it. Account abstraction is the way. Now, basically, I think when it comes to like what token to pay fees in on layer 2, what's going to end up happening is that it's going to be abstracted away where you can pay with any sufficiently liquid tokens, such as ETH, such as the stablecoins, and maybe a select few other tokens out there. But I don't think this is a value accrual mechanism. This is more about providing good user experience for someone. Like you can imagine that someone has stablecoins on a layer 2, for some reason, maybe they withdrew it from an exchange, but they don't have any ETH on there. Well, they should be able to still transact on that layer 2 without having to use ETH. And then it just all happens in the background where maybe the sequencer says, okay, we'll do this, and then we'll kind of like change what stablecoins we need to into ETH in order to pay Ethereum layer 1 fees. And this can all be handled in the background. But it's not really a value driver for tokens like OP. I think the OP token value, as Hasu says here, will come from being able to stake it when they're decentralizing their sequencer out in order to have a share in sequencer profits and basically the fees that are generated off that, plus potentially MEV as well. Now, Hasu replied to this kind of like forum post that Vitalik screenshotted here. I think if I go to his profile, I can kind of bring up the forum post. It's here, and basically expanded on this a little bit more. But yeah, as I said, like if you go to like who posted this, it's literally just look at this. Yeah, it's good. I think it's better for OP in long term. Strongly support this. Let's burn OP, not ETH as gas. Yes, it's good. This can help the project. Yes, that's so good. Best idea for OP. I mean, this doesn't look like real people to me, right? This looks like the same person just saying the same shit, and it's just all yes men. It just, it doesn't make any sense. And, that's why I kind of liked Hasu's reply here, because this is actually Hasu. He cross-posted it to Twitter. He's actually giving more than just yes or no, right? He's given an actual kind of like reasoning around why he thinks this is a bad idea. So it just falls back to what I was saying before. Don't look at these governance forum posts and think that they're anything more than just noise a lot of the time. If you really want signal, look for the people who actually have some credibility behind them, like Hasu and like a bunch of other people in the ecosystem, like Kobe that I talked about yesterday. Don't just look at random people and be like, oh, the sentiment here is great. This is why governance is so hard, guys. This is why I'm bearish on on-chain governance and things like that. At least most of it. Like there's some implementations that can work, but it's just because it's just easy to sybil, and it's also easy for people to kind of just all have mob mentality about things. So governance is hard, but I think when looking at these forum posts, you need to listen to the more credible people, the people who actually have a reputation, the people who actually have a kind of original thoughts, and not just, yes, I think this is good, pump my bags, right? That's not an original thought. That's just really counterproductive to the entire ecosystem, and I don't think it's worth kind of listening to those sorts of people there. But anyway, I'll link this in the YouTube description and you can go check it out for yourself. All right, so I put out a tweet today where I said, I think more people need to be aware of the fact that the vast majority of businesses end up completely failing. There isn't some magical law in crypto that somehow overrides this truth. Most projects in crypto will fail and their tokens will go down 99+% to reflect that. This should be obvious. I'm sorry, guys. The fact that I actually have to spell this out for people, it kind of annoys me, because businesses in the real world, 90% of them fail within the first 3 or 5 years, I believe, right? And I've mentioned this before, but that's just the truth of the matter. In crypto, it's higher than that. It would be at least 95% of projects in this ecosystem fail. And I would say that most of those projects weren't even serious to begin with. They were actual scams, right? Or grifts, or just some kind of Ponzi that didn't really care about any kind of long-term sustainability. There are very, very, very few projects that are going to be around in 5 years, let alone 3 years, let alone 1 year, right? Think about how many projects were around a year ago that are maybe still around as zombies today, but aren't really growing at all, and have basically collapsed and failed completely, right? And their tokens have followed that. This is what makes investing so incredibly hard, because it's so easy to throw money into anything in a bull market, and then it just goes up because everything's going up. But investing in what we're in right now, a bear market, or investing in slow markets, or investing for the long term is very, very difficult. And it's very, very difficult to outperform benchmarks like ETH, let alone USD over the long term, right? I mean, USD is relatively easy to outperform over the long term. In certain things, there are still a lot of things that didn't even get back to their old all-time high in USD during the peak of the bull run when they were really popular in 2017. So just a good thing to keep in mind. Again, this should be obvious to everyone. I would say it's obvious to Refuel listeners and watchers, but I think just generally, especially for the much newer people to the ecosystem, especially the younger ones, they just probably don't realize how many businesses and how many projects just end up completely failing, because you really only hear about the successes, right? You don't really hear about the failures. Like for all the successful businesses out there, there are plenty that failed, that did the same thing or similar things, and they failed for one reason or another. And there's a million different reasons why businesses fail or succeed. Like seriously, if you were to plot out or write out every single reason why a business can succeed or fail, you would have a shit ton. Like you would need so many pages to write it out on, because there's so many variables that go into it. And it doesn't matter if you're a crypto project or a non-crypto project, the same variables apply. It's just the details that may differ. So yeah, just wanted to kind of like put that out there for you guys. All right, so a great little tweet from Pseudotheos today where he said, the merge is not priced in, EIP 4844 is not priced in, PBS is not priced in, danksharding is not priced in, fractal scaling is not priced in. Now, I want to focus on kind of like each of these things individually, but before I do that, honestly, how many people do you think even know what any of these things are? Let alone why they're bullish for Ethereum, let alone how they even work, right? It's not many. Not many at all. The merge, obviously, more people would know about these days because they're just aware of it because there's a big marketing push behind it. But they know the merge as something that's kind of like changes Ethereum to proof of stake. A lot of people probably still don't know about the issuance reduction. They don't know about all the other effects that come with it. They don't know that it's laying the groundwork for kind of like the future upgrades, like the ones listed here. They just don't understand the implications of that. Secondly, EIP 4844. How many people could tell you what that actually is off the top of my head? Off the top of their heads? Hardly anyone, right? It's proto-danksharding, just FYI. I'm sure the loyal Refuel watchers will know what that is. But again, how many people understand what proto-danksharding is and how much scalability it's going to give to layer 2s? Hardly any. Then we move on to PBS. Could you tell me what PBS stands for? Proposer builder separation. That's the answer. What is that, you may ask? Well, it is something that I don't think most people actually need to worry about or know about, but it's basically this concept of separating the proposer of a block and the builder of a block to mitigate against MEV externalities and especially negative externalities. There are multiple blog posts on this. You can find them. You just have to search PBS Ethereum and they should come up on Google. But again, it's very intricate, it's very technical, it's very bleeding edge, so not many people are going to know about it. Then danksharding, which is obviously kind of like an extension or an upgrade over proto-danksharding. Again, how many people understand proto-danksharding, let alone danksharding? Like, they don't, right? And then there's fractal scaling as well, which is like the layer 3 stuff. Again, hardly anyone understands that. I mean, it's again bleeding edge research. I don't think any of that's live right now, or at least it is in some limited fashion with what Immutable has and things like that. But definitely not mass market ready at this point. But yeah, that's the first thing I thought of when I read these things. I was like. How many people, like seriously, how many people understand this? Like, I'll be honest, I don't fully understand PBS and fractal scaling. I think I have a pretty good understanding of the other kind of like things here. But PBS and fractal scaling, I'm still learning about. I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of the more intricate things there. So if I'm still doing that, someone who spends all his time in Ethereum and doing, obviously the refill and stuff like that, can you imagine how many people outside of the ecosystem just have absolutely no idea what these things are? Let alone being able to understand them more than from a high level as well. So this is probably a good weekend reading. I suggest if you guys don't know what any of these things are, just Google them and you'll be able to kind of like read a bunch of stuff about them, and you'll kind of like, it's actually pretty entertaining as well because it makes you feel bullish. Like I know the market's the market right now. I guess I can say the market's the market right now. But if you read kind of like about the future of Ethereum and like the upgrades coming and how beneficial and how awesome they're going to be, I think it makes you bullish. I really think it does. So definitely go give those a Google there. All right, so Balancer announced today that they are live on Optimism. So this is just another app for you to use on Optimism. I know right now Optimism is the talk of the town, considering they just launched their token. They have most of the popular apps that are live on Ethereum Layer 1 now. I think liquidity will obviously get better over time, and there'll be more kind of like users on there, which will obviously improve the overall experience for everyone. But yeah, just generally, I'm glad to see Balancer live on Optimism, one of the kind of like top DeFi protocols on Ethereum, been around for quite a while, and it's just another option for you guys to use there. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out there just to make sure you guys knew about that. And last up here, I have a tweet thread from Bartek again, talking about how L2s derive their security from Ethereum. Now, I'm not going to read out this thread, of course. You can go check this out. I just wanted to kind of highlight it again for you guys because I love Bartek's threads. He does a really, really great job of breaking down how L2s work, how things like bridges work. I mean, I've highlighted plenty of his threads before, so definitely go kind of like check that one out if you haven't haven't yet. All right, now I have about 5 minutes left of this episode. I have something I actually want to really talk about today, going into the weekend. Something very important and very dear to me, especially in the context of, I guess, the world that we're in right now. So we all know the markets are the markets right now. We all know the markets are weak. Doesn't matter if it's crypto, doesn't matter if it's stocks, doesn't matter if it's anything. Markets are weak, inflation is high, interest rates are going up, everything's getting more expensive. It's a shit time out there. For anyone who basically didn't make a lot of money from their investments, it's a pretty bad time. If you've got a job and a nice paying job, you're doing really well still, and you're probably kind of like pretty happy, but you're still feeling the, I guess, heat of inflation because everything's getting more expensive. I mean, some energy providers in Australia right now are having to double their cost of energy, and they've emailed their customers basically saying to them, "Hey, we need you to switch away from us because we're doubling our usage." But the undertones to that is basically that what energy companies do is that they hedge their exposure via kind of like derivative products, and what's ended up happening is they've probably hedged in one direction, and kind of like they have too much exposure on their other direction, which is their customer flow, that they actually, it's this rare kind of like event where having less customers is better for them, which is crazy when you think about it, but that's what it is. So anyway, everything's getting more expensive, inflation is high, all that sort of stuff there. And this can drag you down. This can drag you down mentally, especially depending on, I don't know what position you guys are in individually, of course, but depending on the position that you're in, this can have kind of like adverse kind of like effects on your mental health. Now, I've been talking to a few kind of like friends recently about this, and I always stress to people that your mental health needs to come first over everything else. I know that it's sometimes hard to put it first, or at least probably a lot of the time it's hard to put it first because you've got a lot of other things going on in your lives. As I said, I don't know your lives individually, but we all have our own kind of like problems and issues and things like that. And I have a lot of experience with kind of like with mental health in particular. I spent a lot of my, I guess, teenage years and early adulthood being pretty depressed, pretty aimless in life, not knowing what I wanted to do, not knowing at times if life was even worth it. Like, why am I here if I'm not even having any fun with it, right? And just kind of like going through the motions. And I know, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who experience this. And for me, what really changed, and it wasn't even discovering Ethereum, really. For me, what actually changed my mindset was finding some structure. So what I did was I joined a large telecommunications company in late 2016 in Australia. For the Australians out there, it's called Telstra. You'll know what I'm talking about. And I joined cybersecurity there. And I did basically cybersecurity monitoring, and I was on shift work. What that did for me is it gave me, even though it was shift work, it gave me a structure. It gave me kind of like a new perspective on life. I got to experience the office environment. I got to experience how the real world worked. I met a lot of new people. And, I started feeling better overall. Mentally. It wasn't like perfect yet. It was still a long road ahead of me, but I started feeling better. And then, of course, I discovered Ethereum in early 2017 and did all that, and that made me feel even more better, right? And that kind of like led me to feeling like I actually had a purpose in life. Like I actually felt like that I was not just going somewhere, but I was going somewhere that meant something. Because when I was working at Telstra, like I don't think I had a purpose, but an overall purpose that felt like I was going somewhere. It was more a kind of like structure thing where I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm getting decent pay here. This is cool. I don't have to worry about my future, or at least my short-term future anymore. This is all well and good. I'm having fun. This is fine. And then as things went on, I lost interest in the kind of like cybersecurity world. I lost interest in my job, and obviously because of Ethereum, and that kind of like became my full-time thing there. But the reason why I'm telling you kind of like the TLDR of the last, I guess, 5 or 6 years of my life is because I think what a lot of people miss is that they chase different things that don't necessarily add to your purpose or add to your kind of like happiness. What they do is they give you this kind of like short-term boost in happiness, right? Where it's kind of like, okay, you buy a new thing or you do something, or you go, maybe you go away on a holiday, and it's fine for like a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even last a couple months, but then you revert back to that kind of like state you were in, right? And that's because you're not targeting the root of the issue. And I know it's actually quite hard to kind of like find the root of the issue when it comes to kind of like mental health. And, there's nothing wrong with going to therapy to find it or anything like that. Like I've never been to kind of like therapy. myself, even though plenty of people told me to go, I just never went. Like for one reason or another, I think there's a bit of a negative stigma around it too, but I just never went. And I was able to kind of like get myself out of what I was feeling. And I owe a lot of that to Ethereum, of course, and to the community around it. But I think just generally, it doesn't matter what way you do it, as long as you're able to kind of like heal at the end of the day. And okay, now I'm going to get to my point quickly before I wrap up here. The point of why I'm bringing this up for you guys is because I know that a lot of people out there are relying on crypto to fix that hole for them and to change that hole for them and to basically make them enough money so that they can stop quote unquote wage cucking or quote unquote fiat mining, or quote unquote working for the man or anything like that. Guys, as someone who did that, as someone who is now financially independent, as you guys know, I'm telling you right now, if all I had was the money and I didn't have what I have and I wasn't doing what I was doing with the Daily Gwei and I wasn't involved with Ethereum and I wasn't getting enjoyment out of those things, I would be right back where I was from 6 years ago. I would still be depressed. Like I can guarantee that. I can guarantee that. And I still feel it from time to time. It's not like I'm happy 24/7. No one is, right? But I think that when you shouldn't tie your emotions to kind of like the markets, you shouldn't rely on crypto for anything, but you should, if you enjoy crypto, if you enjoy being involved in this ecosystem, you should keep doing what you're doing. Maybe get a job if you haven't gotten a job in the ecosystem yet. Maybe just do more research. Maybe you're happy just listening to me on the Refuel and you're happy in the job that you have. That's totally fine. But this message is really for those people out there who may be suffering from mental health issues, or maybe suffering from lack of purpose, lack of kind of like direction, especially the younger people among you. I know, when you're younger, this probably affects you more so than kind of people in the older bracket, but it affects people of all ages. You just kind of like stick with kind of like what makes you happy, what you feel like gives you a purpose, and try not to chase those short-term kind of like happiness things. Like I've done that plenty of times before. I've tried to fill the hole before I kind of like joined Telstra and then found Ethereum. I tried to fill the hole with so many different things and it never worked. Like food was a major one for me. I did a lot of depression eating. That's why I put on a lot of weight. That's another thing as well, guys. Like physical activity and not being overweight plays a large part in mental health as well. But yeah, I tried to fill it with things. Like I tried to buy stuff. I tried to fill it with video games, to forget the pain, so to speak. And it's just, they're not long-term solutions. They're short-term solutions. And as you guys know, on the Refuel, we're all about playing long-term games, whether it's being in the investments, in kind of like crypto, or your investment in yourself. So yeah, that's kind of like my point of why I wanted to talk about that there. And that hopefully gives you something to think about going into the weekend. And I hope all of you are doing okay. I know the markets are rough right now, but again, I always caution against leverage trading. Please don't do that. I always kind of like caution against tying your happiness to the markets, or tying kind of like your, I guess, your like all of your net worth to the markets, or your income to the markets. You shouldn't do that. You should kind of like have a plan and have like a long-term plan, a sustainable one that accounts for both bull and bear markets at the end of the day. But also outside of the markets, you should definitely just focus on your general mental health and find what makes you happy and what gives you purpose, and stick with that. And I'm talking long-term, always long-term, guys. Like short-term stuff is not great, right? And not something that we're about on the Daily Gwei. But on that note, I'm going to leave it at that for today. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all next week. Thanks, everyone.